on this Friday edition of Newsline at noon. After an overwhelming victory in Wednesday's by-elections, the ruling Saenuri Party shifts its focus to legislation aimed at speeding up the economic recovery and overhauling the government. Korea's major export industries are feeling the heat from an influx of cheap Chinese products and capital, adding to the woes stemming from the strong Korean won. Plus, with the death toll from the Ebola outbreak topping 700, the World Health Organization and West African leaders are seeking emergency measures to control the epidemic. These stories and more on Newsline at noon. It's noon Friday, August 1st here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, with the by-elections behind them, Korea's semi-new look National Assembly is turning its focus to a number of bills that are designed to energize the lackluster economy and improve, hopefully, the people's livelihoods.
And adding to these bills at the top of the agenda, in fact, is a key piece of legislation designed to uncover the exact cause of April's ferry disaster. Myung-kil reports.
More than 7,000 bills await parliamentary review, but none are perhaps as urgent as the one that is aimed at uncovering the causes of April's ferry disaster. The rival parties continue to spar over the details of the so-called Sewol-ho ferry bill, which proposes creating a panel of inquiry to look into the tragedy. But Saenuri Party lawmakers remain opposed to giving the panel prosecutorial powers. Other bills on the table include one that would subject civil servants and their relatives to criminal penalties if they accept more than 1 million won, or around $8,000, from a third party, regardless of whether it was intended as a bribe. The scope of the measures are under dispute by the parties, who can't agree on whether they should extend to siblings, spouses, or even cousins of civil servants. And with President Park Geun-hye urging all-out efforts to boost the economy, lawmakers are under pressure to pass a stack of economic bills. They range from the introduction of tax schemes that encourage companies to pay higher wages, and easing mortgage rules that limit loans for home buyers, to support for companies that transition temporary employees into permanent positions. The ruling Saenuri Party's victory in this week's by-election raised its number of seats to 158 in the 300-member National Assembly. That means the governing party can now push bills through the parliament unilaterally without the cooperation of the main opposition party. Myung-kil, Arirang News.
Korea has enjoyed export success in a number of sectors ranging from smartphones and steel to petrochemicals. But Chinese companies are now flooding the market with cheaper products, forcing Korean enterprises to branch out to other sectors. Kim Ji-yeon has the details.
China is increasingly taking bigger bites out of Korea's pie. Chinese smartphone makers are starting to encroach on Samsung Electronics' territory. Although Samsung remained #1 in global market share in the first half of the year at 23%, China's Xiaomi was a close second at 21%. The Chinese smartphone makers are gaining ground as their skills catch up with their attractive pricing. It's a similar story for Korea's petrochemical and steel companies. The operating profits of Korea-based steelmaker POSCO in the second quarter stood at $547.6 million, down from $681 million on year. At the same time, the rate of steel imports used in the domestic market has sharply increased. The proportion of steel imports stood at 40% from January to May this year, up more than 11 percentage points compared to the same period last year. More than half of those imports came from China. An official from the Korea Trade Investment and Promotion Agency told the Seoul-based Joseon Daily that the country needs to expand the types of goods it exports and should shift more of its focus toward consumer goods such as health and beauty products and the service sector. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, despite the threats out of China, Korea's trade balance stayed in the black for the 30th month in July. The Trade Ministry says exports rose 5.7% on year last month to $48 billion, while imports gained 5.8% to $46 billion. Compared to July last year, exports of wireless mobile devices saw the biggest increase at 25%, while exports of ships went the other direction, dropping 14%. The shipbuilding industry was hit due to an 80% drop in orders from China. The Trade Ministry says related ministry officials will meet soon to discuss the slump in exports to China, which is the largest importer of Korean goods. Korea's consumer prices gained at the slowest rate in 3 months in July as the price of vegetables and livestock stayed relatively stable. Statistics Korea says the country's consumer price index rose 1.6% last month from a year earlier, slower than the 1.7% gain the previous month. Now, the agency attributes the low but stable price increase to a lack of severe weather conditions such as typhoons or heavy rainfall, which has led to some bumper harvest. Core inflation, which excludes things like oil and food prices, rose 2.2% on year last month. Finance Ministry officials expect the prices to remain stable for the time being. And the Korean government has announced an extra 5 trillion won, or roughly $4.8 billion in stimulus spending. That's on top of the $40 billion package the government announced last week. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan explained Thursday that extra funding for the measures came available because of the strengthened won, which decreased the foreign currency debt owed by public agencies. The extra $4.8 billion will be funneled toward the construction of public rental housing and power plants, helping people pay off student loans and supporting small and mid-sized companies.
A group of defense experts is advising the US government to work closely with China to prepare for a worst-case scenario in North Korea. They also suggest Washington send more troops to South Korea to keep an unpredictable North Korea in check. Kim Min-ji reports.
American defense experts say the U.S. government needs to closely communicate with Chinese leaders in order to prepare for a state of emergency in North Korea. A report by the U.S. National Defense Panel led by former Defense Secretary William Perry and retired Army General John Abizad says the most probable emergency scenarios would be the breakout of a war or regime collapse. The independent panel assesses the Pentagon's quadrennial defense review. The report added there was an increased need to dispatch U.S. troops to South Korea amid heightened tensions on the peninsula. It added that the stationing of smart weapons was also urgent in order to ease nuclear tensions and reduce civilian death in case of war. Citing the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the report said North Korea is concentrating on the development of nuclear weapons and missiles because it lacks conventional military strength, adding that plans are needed to secure the North's nuclear weapons in case they fall into the hands of terrorists. The panel also said North's precise guided missiles and poor cyber community makes it difficult for U.S. defense planners to come up with plans in how to deal with an emergency situation out of Pyongyang. The panel report added the defense review fails to fully address growing national security threats, including nuclear proliferation by North Korea and Iran, the insurgency in Iraq, and the crisis in Ukraine. The chairman of the House Committee on Armed Services, Howard McKeown, said the U.S. military is facing a high risk, adding that a strong military underwrites all other tools the U.S. has for global influence. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A North Korean propaganda group has threatened South Korea and the United States, saying North Korea will attack if they go ahead with their planned joint military exercise Ulchi Freedom Guardian. The Korean National Peace Committee says the headquarters of the government, such as South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwa-dae and the White House, will be targeted. It also warned against testing the North's patience and its efforts for peace and prosperity by carrying out the planned exercise. Now, Ulchi Freedom Guardian is an annual joint combat readiness exercise that takes place for around 2 weeks every August to test and improve the two allies' joint defense posture against possible provocations from the North. The United States is once again calling on North Korea to release Kenneth Bae, the US missionary who has been detained in the north for more than 18 months now. Deputy State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf says the US is very concerned about his health, and she urged Pyongyang to grant him special amnesty and immediate release on humanitarian grounds. Her comments came after Mr. Bae told a pro-North Korea newspaper based in Japan this week that he felt abandoned by the US government. Responding to Mr. Bae's plea, his family demanded the US government do whatever it takes to bring him home. Kenneth Bae, who is suffering a number of serious health issues, was arrested in November 2012, convicted of unspecified anti-state crimes and sentenced to 15 years hard labour last year. Now, in economic financial news, the global markets reacted, as you'd expect, really, to news that Argentina was defaulting on its debt for the second time in just 13 years. The uncertainty pushed the Dow Jones nearly 2% lower on Thursday. That's its biggest drop since February, and it wipes out the year's gains thus far. The S&P 500 slipped 2%. In Europe, there were similar losses seen, with Germany's DAX and France's benchmark CAC 40 being hit hard. But none slid as far as Argentina's stock market, which dropped more than 8%. This obviously because of the default. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Friday afternoon. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Centre.
Eunice, health officials worldwide are watching the deadliest Ebola outbreak in West Africa very closely, and many are concerned that it's getting out of control and could spread around the globe.
Right, that's a scenario that officials are working hard to avoid. The WHO is now preparing a $100 million plan to contain this deadly virus, which has already killed more than 700 people since breaking out earlier this year. Our Connie Lee has more.
Health authorities in West Africa are struggling to contain a deadly Ebola outbreak.
To look over this fence right behind you now and look at the patients, and you know that their chances are very small, and it's horrible.
More than 700 people, including dozens of health workers, have died so far from this year's outbreak, and there are currently more than 1,300 others who are confirmed to have the virus. Sierra Leone, one of the hardest hit countries, is currently in a state of emergency, and health officials have begun to quarantine certain areas. The rapid spread of the virus is putting a strain on the nation.
Already we had a very inadequate health workforce, and we don't have enough specialists in country as far as medical doctors and even specialist nurses are concerned.
That concern has spread throughout the world. The World Health Organization said Thursday that it is launching a $100 million response plan to combat Ebola in West Africa.
The plan includes, identifies a whole range of medical personnel required to help support the response to the outbreak.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has advised Americans to avoid non-essential travel to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. There is no cure or vaccine for Ebola. The fatality rate of the current outbreak stands at about 60%. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Israel and Hamas has agreed to a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza to begin in about 2 hours' time. The surprising development was announced by the UN and the U.S. earlier this morning.
This will last for 72 hours, 3 days. Precious time. It is a lull of opportunity, a moment for the sides, the different factions to be able to come together with the State of Israel in an effort to try to address ways to find a sustainable ceasefire.
And once the temporary truce is in place, Secretary Kerry said Egypt will invite all related parties to come to Cairo immediately for serious and focused negotiations. But Israel is expected to continue its strike on the cross-border tunnels being used by Hamas fighters to access and attack Israel from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had promised to annihilate the network of what he called terror tunnels with or without a ceasefire, and that any plan that does not allow Israel to reach this end would not be considered. Meanwhile, some progress in the stalled recovery mission in eastern Ukraine. Kiev's deputy prime minister said a safe corridor will be established, leading to the crash site of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. Talks in Belarus among officials from Ukraine, the OSCE, and Russia produced the agreement. This as a team of more than 50 Dutch and Australian police and forensic experts finally arrived at the crash site Thursday, following multiple attempts in the past week. They will initially focus their efforts on collecting human remains still lying out since the shoot-down on July 17th. A 24-hour ceasefire had been declared, but fighting has continued around the crash site. A series of underground gas explosions has torn through Taiwan's second-largest city, killing at least 22 people and injuring hundreds of others. Fire officials say it happened around midnight local time in Kaohsiung, adding that firefighters responding to initial reports of a gas leak were among the fatalities. Taiwan's premier said there were at least 5 powerful blasts, while the director of its disaster agency said the gas was likely propane, which is not extinguishable by water. The explosion shot through the city's sewage system, spawning huge flames and creating large holes resembling huge caves. Residents told local media it felt like the area had been hit by a powerful earthquake.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on NEWSLINE at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
The amount of people using the Android operating system hit an all-time high during the second quarter of this year. Market research firm Strategy Analytics says global smartphone shipments reached 295 million units in the April to June period this year, up 27% from the same period last year. Of those, 85% were Android smartphones, jumping nearly 5 percentage points from a year earlier. The market share of Apple iOS fell to 12%, Microsoft dropped to 2.7%, while BlackBerry and others also lost ground. Now, earlier this year, Korea saw the worst ever data breach of credit card companies, with basically all client databases leaked. So to better protect personal information, Koreans will be allowed to change their resident registration number starting next year if they think their data has been leaked or in any way compromised. The 13-digit number, roughly equivalent to the Social Security number in the U.S. and assigned to every Korean at their birth, have been the country's biggest target of data theft in recent years. It contains basic personal information such as gender and date and place of birth, and they're widely used in financial affairs, from tax and property registration to medical insurance and military services to opening bank accounts or even applying for credit cards. The Security Ministry says it will come up with punitive measures against those responsible for leaking personal info through one's resident registration number.
Now, there's a service out there that's foreign to many Seoulites but is catching on like wildfire. The smartphone app-based car service Uber has been in Korea for about a year now, and users have started to enjoy their smooth rides, even though it does come at a much steeper price. But Uber has recently run into some roadblocks of its own. The Seoul city government says the service is illegal and it's looking to block the app. Our Lee Ji-yeon reports.
Kim Il-min is a software engineer and startup business owner. He's also an avid user of the viral car service Uber, which landed in Seoul just about a year ago. With a simple tap on his smartphone app, Kim has a luxurious ride ready to take him across town. His personal pickups are usually reserved for special occasions when he wants an extra something for himself, and he says that's what makes the experience special.
The drivers are a lot friendlier, so it feels good as a passenger.
Uber is now found in more than 150 cities across the world, but the service is still relatively new in Seoul, and the premium black sedan service, Uber Black, is so far the only option available. But the Seoul city government strongly opposes Uber's service and just last week threatened to ban the app, calling it illegal. It says Uber is encroaching on the business of other taxi drivers in Seoul. So how much of a problem is it in Korea's mega capital? We asked taxi drivers whether they know about Uber, and the response was no, no, and no. Only 3 out of 20 drivers were aware of the application. And it's not so much about Uber snatching up their customers, it was more about the legality of their cars. It's an argument echoing Seoul City's stance on the car service. But Uber denies this, saying it uses car companies already licensed for business operation. And users say those cars have been providing excellent service in a city where at times it's impossible to get a cab, especially in downtown areas late at night. They say it's a comfortable, convenient option at your fingertips.
And that option, I believe, should be available for all citizens. And I don't think that necessarily takes the pie out of any industry, but we just create that option for that special need.
And while saying it will actively try to block the Uber service, Seoul says it will create its own app for cab drivers in the city.
The fact that there's demand for the service, even though it's more expensive, means there's a problem with existing taxi services.
Meanwhile, Uber says it wants more people to know about the service so they can hitch their rides, not on a curb, but on their phones. Lee Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, this week and the next are generally considered the peak summer vacation period here in Korea, and often it's when vacationers head off on a big trip overseas. But this year, many Koreans are choosing to spend their break at any one of Korea's prime holiday spots. Now, Shin Se-min reports.
The peak summer vacation season is here. From late July and early August every year, more than half of Korea's population takes time away from their daily grind to go on vacation, especially now that school's out.
My 11-year-old daughter is free from school and academies these 2 weeks, which is why we're taking our family vacation now.
Many Koreans tend to go overseas for their holiday, but this year, with the economy stagnant due to the nation's April ferry disaster, vacationers are opting to stay within the country. Among the numerous sites to visit, many are choosing to head to beaches or valleys to beat the heat. Popular destinations like the southeastern port city of Busan are overloaded with people enjoying the sun and surf. Filling almost every inch of the 1.7-kilometer stretch of sand, the nation's largest beach has already welcomed over 1.5 million people this past Sunday alone.
Spending my vacation with my friends in Busan couldn't have been better. We've planned many things during our stay.
As an office worker, it wasn't as easy to take days off for the vacation, but now that I'm here with my girlfriend from Japan, I plan to eat and show her as many attractions in Busan.
And with the week-long Busan Sea Festival kicking off this Friday, including concerts and bikini competitions, the city is sure to attract even more visitors.
It's crowded and can be expensive, but that hasn't stopped the flow of vacationers descending on Busan in the past and won't this year either. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Busan.
Well, it's a peak summer vacation season as we just saw, but for the next couple of days, we'll have more than the heat to worry about. Typhoon Nakri is slowly heading northward, starting to southern parts of the peninsula and Jeju Island. So showers from the southern region should gradually spread to the upper provinces throughout the weekend and the start of next week. And Nakri brings with it gusty winds, strong tides, and heavy showers, which are expected to sweep the whole peninsula. So again, for those of you who are on the summer vacation this weekend, please pay special attention to the future weather updates. But right now here in Seoul, it's so hot and sunny right now, as the heat wave warning was issued about an hour ago, and the heat wave advisory is still in place for much of the country. And the high in Seoul will rise to 34, and Daegu will climb to 33, while Busan should climb to 29 this afternoon. And for other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 29 and 33, while Dokdo should see a high of 30. And for this weekend, we have a lot of rain in picture. Starting Sunday here in Seoul, up to 40 millimeters are expected, but the path of typhoon could be changed. Well, that's all for me now, and back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you very much, Jiyeon, for the weather there, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Mark and I'll be back at the same time on Monday. Have a great weekend.